Welcome to the Regenaissance Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Griggs. Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Griggs. I'm the host of the Regenaissance Podcast. And today, alongside me is Trent Loos, a sixth-generational rancher from Nebraska. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Ryan. I better qualify this because people like to get hung up on it. My family came from Germany to Quincy, Illinois, Adams County in 1839. In fact, this barn door behind me comes out of a barn that my great great grandfather built in 1889, and that barn still stands. But I chose to leave Illinois, and my wife and I, my wife's from Nebraska, we started our own place here in central Nebraska. So I'm not sixth generation from Nebraska,
Oh,
I'm sixth
yeah.
generation in the United States, and we are first generation in Nebraska. But Kelly, my wife, is fifth generation in this county that we are ranching in here today.
And that's just really interesting, too. I didn't even think about that as a whole for agriculture with being sixth generation. But I'm curious then, what led you to Nebraska from Illinois then in terms of agriculture?
Well, Ryan, you should have picked up on that love.
That's completely fair.
But it's twofold because Kelly was actually working in the reproductive lab. She has a master's in reproductive physiology from, I believe, your old stomping ground, so to speak. She went to the University of Kentucky to get her master's degree, and then she was working in a repro lab at the University of Missouri. We met there, and I had a 365-acre farm there when we met, and we moved from there to South Dakota. We brought 300 cows with us, moved to the Rosebud Reservation just north of Valentine, Nebraska. And then as our girls, we have three daughters, as our oldest two girls were born and getting of age, we felt like they just needed to grow up in the shadows of their grandparents. My parents obviously were Quincy, Illinois. Her parents were here in central Nebraska. And so in 2002, I like to say we came home, but I love Nebraska. I love my wife. And so it was just the perfect place to raise three daughters.
Now, with that too, whenever you were searching specifically for Nebraska, because I'm always curious too, because for me personally, I've told myself that figuring out, because I want to ranch long term too, but there's just so many amazing, incredible spots around America, and I feel like it's going to be just as hard figuring out where I want to ranch with finding a wife for that too. So I'm curious, how did you go about figuring out where to go specifically in Nebraska?
We came back to the county that she grew up in. We're 15 miles from where she grew up. And we found a place that we were able to. We sold our place in Missouri. We did not buy a place in South Dakota. We leased a place. We ran our cows on leased acres there. And then we came here and leased a place for about 5 years. It must have been just a hair over that, Ryan. And then 2006, we were able to buy this place where we run our cows. We have cows, sows, and horses here today.
I've actually never really talked much on horses for the context of agriculture too, because I've seen this quite a bit whenever I was traveling to where I would just see farms with just horses. I guess what would be the reasonings for just having a bunch of horses outside of, to ride them around? But if you're not using it for that, I'm just curious to, because I've driven around a lot the last 3 years, and I noticed that everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never, I guess, taken the time to really dig into to the why.
So the horse is such an interesting critter, and I believe we have 22. That's not a correct statement. I have 22 equine, two of which are mules. I'm kind of a mule man, to be honest. I love riding a mule, but I also really enjoy draft. And so I have some Percherons. And one year, I decided that I was going to, I don't remember if this would have been about 2011, probably. I decided that I was going to have a team of Percherons pulling my chuck wagon, which I have a 1908 Newton chuck wagon, and go to every state in the nation featuring a veteran. Because what I've long had as a mantra in 25 years of doing media work is that we need to have an appreciation for the farmer, the rancher, and the veteran, because the two entities that protect our freedom are the entities that produce our domestic supply of food, and those who are willing to risk their life to protect our freedom in the name of the United States military. And so I was able to accomplish 14 states in one year, featuring a veteran. And the last one that I was in, the last parade that I was in, was the Chicago Thanksgiving Day parade. And I grew up downstate Illinois. Never had a great appreciation for Chicago, other than, that generates a lot of people who become governor who end up in jail. That was my thoughts of Chicago at the time. But I have to tell you that after we participated in this parade and had 700,000 people standing along State Street, I'm driving a team of Pertrons with Tony Gallagher, who was retired not only United States Army, but also CIA. In fact, he told the story that the day that Ronald Reagan was standing there, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, that he was impersonating a German officer that day.
Hmm.
And so it was just quite interesting to have him. And I featured a veteran in each one of those parades. But to drive a team of horses in a parade with 700,000 people alongside with your then 12-year-old daughter riding her horse as an outrider, it was a tremendous experience. And I really look back fondly upon that. Unfortunately, right after that, one of my horses developed an internal bacterial infection, and I lost Josh, and had nothing to do with being in Chicago. It just was the timing. And I haven't been in a parade since. Well, I have been in a parade, but not with a team. I had to drive single a few times. But for me, there was a period of time when I really started speaking around the country and around the world. And the past 25 years around, I've been very blessed to speak in 48 states and on 4 continents about the importance of agriculture and the domestic supply of food and fuel for a free future has always been my message. But when you are somewhere speaking in Moorfield, West Virginia, for example, to a group of poultry producers, and I come home, the first thing I need to do is get on a horse or a mule. And they give credit to Winston Churchill. I believe it was Theodore Roosevelt who actually said the outside of a horse is good for the inside of a man. And there's really something to that. Now, we use them for our ranch activities, and I continue to try to assemble more of my draft equipment so that we can do more things like rake hay, bale hay, and do things with the team of horses.
That is a really interesting story with veterans because that's one thing that I've thought about a lot too. I forgot the name of the association, but there is a beekeeping association that they work with veterans because that's veterans get screwed in a lot of ways. And one thing that could be really cool with agriculture moving forward too is finding ways to because I've noticed when talking to some veterans too, it's just a lost sense of there can be a lost sense of purpose too. And this is what I try to talk to with just people in general, to where what they're currently working on, whether it be in a big city or not, might not be fulfilling at all for themselves, even though they might be, financially okay and can actually have some money to still enjoy in life, but still deep down they don't have that fulfillment aspect at all. And that's why I try to push them to visit a farmer or rancher, even just talk to a farmer or rancher, because again, that might be you might be taking a quote unquote pay cut and it's just an entirely new lifestyle. But the fulfillment aspect is the incredible trade off for that. Because for me personally, I know I mentioned before the podcast started, I didn't talk to a farmer rancher until I was 27. And then a year later, I had my first experience working on a farm. And ever since working on that farm, every single day I've thought about that farm. And I just know there's a lot of people out there that they just don't have the, I guess, awareness because again we're just so disconnected from our food. So I'm curious then, with all of the media you've done and just speaking, is that primarily towards producers too, or are you also talking to folks such as myself that have some interest but might not have any idea what to do with agriculture or just learning starting out?
That's honestly been the great challenge, is not to just spend all of your time preaching to the choir, because my mission from the day one, which was basically January of 2001 when Loose Tales began, that's a daily radio program that I still do today. It's easy to get a crowd of farmers, but what's the point of talking about the importance of agriculture to a group of farmers? And, we've obviously incorporated fuel because we tend to overlook how important fuel has been. And it's interesting that it was this week, I believe, in 1825, that the patent on the combustion engine 26 or 1826, the patent on the combustion engine came about. And if you think about how fuel has changed, and I'm talking about petroleum, diesel, 1 gallon of diesel fuel replaces 500 man hours of food labor production. Everything changed in terms of how we had the ability to produce enough food to feed an ever growing population. And so my struggle has been, how do we take this message and get this to the non-farm public so that we get back to where you started this entire conversation? Bridging that gap between people who produce food and the people who rely on the food being available. And then also along with that, continuing to inspire them to demand accountability on where the food is produced, and ask the question, because we're at a very dangerous time in American agriculture. We know that for 2025 we're going to have 50 billion more dollars of agricultural products imported into the United States and than we export to other countries. There's simply no excuse for that, other than bananas and coffee and some things that must be grown in the tropical region. We should be self sufficient. We should be a net food exporter, and we've allowed ourselves to rely on other countries, and that is the biggest risk to our national security.
Wow, 50. So out of the 50 billion, what all, because I know that they're importing eggs from Turkey and I think it was South Korea and an unnamed third location. And I know we import a
Brazil.
lot. Brazil. Okay.
We've
Where,
increased our Brazilian egg imports since February 1 by about 92%.
why? I guess why exactly Brazil?
Well, because Brazil has them available, but it should be very troubling to people because until the last 30 days or so, it was not accessible for Brazil to send eggs here. They could be going into food ingredients and cooked on site. But since the debacle with H5N1, which I think is a USDA debacle, not a chicken debacle, we've now allowed Brazilian eggs to be sold on the market as whole shell eggs, consumed as we buy eggs anywhere.
Can you elaborate what you meant for it's a USDA debacle?
The USDA has, since October of 2022, killed 170 million poultry. Now, that's a combination mostly of chickens, a tremendous number of laying hens, but actually more broilers than laying hens, which is very interesting in the bigger complex because we got a shortage of eggs. You have not seen any movement whatsoever in the broiler market, in other words, the chicken you buy. And yet the biggest impact has been on the broiler side. If you look at the one part of the 170 million that have been euthanized, if they test positive for H5N1, and they come in and they euthanize the entire flock. Nobody that understands stockmanship or how viruses and natural immunity work would suggest that you do this, and yet they've continued to do that. And so, if you look at what the USDA has done, it just does not. And the other thing about that, they continue to tell us that this virus, H5N1, is spread by migratory fowl. In no way, shape, or form do I believe, with all of the positives from coast to coast in the United States, minus Montana. Apparently, migratory birds don't fly over Montana because Montana has yet to have a single positive case of H5N1, and there are turkey flocks in Montana and chicken, both. Uh, I don't believe that a migratory bird. I live in a path of the sandhill cranes right here in central Nebraska. 75% of all sandhill cranes cross the Platte River just south of me. And so during the spring a month ago, we had daily migration of these birds. And we're to believe that a fecal dropping from a bird flying over is going to land in your yard, and you're going to walk through that and then walk into your barn and contaminate your birds. Your odds of going to Las Vegas and winning $1 million, I think, are better than actually dragging this virus from a bird flying over into your barn, which a lot of these poultry barns are all in, shower out anyway. So it just doesn't make any common sense to me that if the bird was exposed to the outside, backyard flock, whatever the case may be, there would be more validity to it. I, in no way, shape, or form, Ryan, believe that these migratory birds are infecting commercial flocks inside biosecure buildings at the level that we're told they're infecting them.
It's been, I wholeheartedly agree with that. It's been very disappointing to follow along with all of that because it seems like the whole focus has been to get the cost down and just use massive exports or imports, I should say, rather than I was looking at just a couple days ago of an USDA ad. I think it was from 1918 on backyard chickens, and then I think about World War II with the whole Victory Garden push. How come the USDA is not doing anything like that to where we could do a massive push of educational, informative videos and posts to showcase that you can just have backyard chickens? Because I live in Austin and literally there's a neighbor right down the road. He's got backyard chickens. And there's another neighbor actually I saw that has backyard chickens too. And so the fact that that can happen in Austin, it's just been very infuriating and to me calculated to why they're not doing that because of food sovereignty in some ways. So yeah, because the whole and then going on to back to the talks of ethanol or production costs too for fuel. I saw the USDA also just was talking about I think it was $550 million for 545 different projects related to all of this as well, and I don't know. It just continues to seem like they are just working with big ag and doing more of the same.
I like the path you were going on from 1918 on backyard chickens, and during World War II, the Victory Gardens. But in the 50s, right after World War II, you can find USDA literature that is encouraging farmers to move their chickens inside to protect them from weather, predators, and disease. And here we are in 2025, and I've been working on this for 10 years. There's this whole negative connotation that if you have chickens or pigs or any animal in a CAFO, oh my goodness, a CAFO, concentrated animal feeding operation, you're somehow contributing to harm and devastation when in fact the reason for the barn is to protect the animals. And they very aggressively in the 50s, the USDA was telling people, get your chickens in a barn. And then we moved to where chickens were laying on average about 220 eggs a year. And in 2024, before we really hit the height of what we've been talking about here, well, I should go back to 2023. We have chickens laying in excess of 300 eggs a year. And why does the chicken production increase? Because we've reduced the stress. Anytime you reduce stress in an animal or a human, they do what God put them on this earth to naturally do, and that is to reproduce. And so chickens are laying more eggs than ever before because we have found a way to reduce all the stressors in their environment, keep them healthy, keep the foxes from chasing them, and getting them adequate feed and water on a daily basis. The proof is in the pudding, or I should say, in the egg laying barn.
Interesting. Because then on the flip side, though, with that is what a lot has come out through the CAFOs is just a lot of horrific videos. And then that's what, because I was also vegan for 2.5 years and I didn't watch any of the documentaries per se, but I definitely vividly remember this was back in 2017, 2018, 2019 of seeing some of the stuff within CAFOs pertaining to chickens and pigs too. And so that's I know another major topic is just the animal welfare in the context of these confinement areas because as this is just with every industry is just trying to be max efficiency and max profits essentially, and so there could be trade-offs depending on the business. Like for example Fairlife, they are a major retail store for ultra processed milk or ultra filtered milk, but then year after year after year, they come out to where a lot of the farms that they are working with just massive abuse, just horrific videos. Because I remember sharing it a couple months ago, to where then they immediately fired those two farms. So that's also what's kind of hard from the consumer standpoint is there's no way to really see that stuff, and it can make it very challenging to figure out if you're supporting the right thing. But that's also why I always preach to actually shake the hand that feeds you, because to me that's really the only way to 100% verify that you're supporting what you believe is the right way to grow food and treat the animals well for their 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 well-being, and then also therefore the health of the meat that we consume.
So I was very involved in the very first video that came out of Indiana by Rensselaer, if you know where that is, right off the interstate between Lafayette and Chicago, where Fair Oaks Dairy was built, and that first video that surfaced. And and there's been several in every species, but you cannot continue to operate a farm and be sustainable if you're not taking care of the animal first and foremost. If the animal, it comes back to what I mentioned before, if you're doing anything to induce stress, you're not going to own that animal very long because you're going to be broke, and then somebody's going to buy your place, and the infrastructure is going to be shifted to someone else because the infrastructure, once it's there, needs to be utilized by somebody. And invariably, in almost every case that I have tracked down, in fact, one day you can find this still on the internet. There was a Wyoming pig farm that was accused of abusing animals. And I went to that farm because I said, nobody who owns a farm would allow this to happen and still be in the farming business. Sure enough, they had hired somebody that was undercover for an animal rights organization, and they create an environment and capture footage that makes it appear as though what is happening on a regular basis, when in fact it was somebody put there for the specific purpose of taking down an entity. That did not happen at Fair Oaks. Fair Oaks Dairy, the one you're alluding to, it had a couple people working there that simply did not share the culture of the rest of animal agriculture. Once that was exposed, they were gone, and the people who are in management there tried to get that fixed. But you have to get to the bottom of it. Kind of like you said, you need to. If you can shake the hand of the people that produce your food, that is always going to be the best answer. But to believe that people are out here in barns just routinely abusing animals, neglecting animals, is simply, it's a fabrication of the internet. It's not the case for 99% of the time.
I agree with that too, because I remember surfacing a video between, I don't remember if it was in America or the UK, of a farmer talking to a vegan activist, and she was just saying how, he rapes his animals by artificially insemination. He's in it for profits, and I forgot the third thing that she said, but to me that goes to your point of just the sensationalized videos on the internet and the massive disconnect, because the farmer, I could not imagine being in his shoes, just hearing that, being told that he's in it just for raking in profits and that he's just essentially raping his animals. The farm I worked on never saw a single thing of that ever, and I never would as long as I worked on that farm. And I know that just keeps continue reiterating. But that's why I tell people, if what you see, kind of like what you just did going to the Wyoming pig farm, is what you see online, what you're being told about raw milk. Go visit a raw dairy farmer. Go visit a local farmer ranch. Ask some of these questions, and you can really see for yourself, and also just hear from the people that are actually doing the work, and then compare that versus what you're being told by the people that are just sitting in their chair in some office and probably have never even gone on a farm.
Spot on. We couldn't agree more.
So I want to segue into the one point that I originally reached out to you months back on John Deere, because John Deere is synonymous with agriculture in America. It was founded in, I believe, 1837, and it's just interesting with the whole tractor aesthetic of agriculture. Because I remember the very first ranch I visited in Colorado, there, and one of the parts of the land, they had, I think it was like a 1910 or 1920 tractor that had just been broken down but been there the whole time, and it's just really cool to see and think about that history. But then over time, I know John Deere has changed, and there's been a lot of problems. One being that I remember watching how with the machinery, it's taken the model that Apple did with theirs, to where they control the whole process of repairs, and the essentially the farmer is not even the owner of the machinery. They're just using it, and they have to have an actual John Deere repairman who knows how long that takes. They force the cost on you way higher than what it actually would take to repair. But then what you mentioned on Twitter was talking about how um, John Deere's using farmers selling data and contributing to just food production consolidation. But then lastly, the biggest thing that surprised me the most was Bill Gates is the largest shareholder in John Deere. So I just love to talk more on John Deere now and America's agriculture, and really it's just exactly what is going on with all of that, because that's just a lot.
So Ryan, in 25 years, I've talked about a lot of things that sometimes farmers didn't want to hear, and I don't know that anything is above the list when you start talking about what John Deere is really doing today to the farmer. Because there are people that I believe if you took a urine sample, they have green and gold in their urine. I mean, they're just that true blue to the whole cause. And yet, John Deere has become enemy number one against the farmer. And I was in Bismarck. This was last fall. It was October. I was speaking to a group, and I was alluding to a little bit, and this was probably the height of when I was trying to bring awareness to what John Deere's doing. And I spoke to this group, and when I got done, a guy came up to me and he said, "Hey, I got to tell you, back in the 90s," and he thought it was 1994, he was at a meeting where there was an executive from John Deere speaking, and somebody, when he was kind of wrapping up his comments, and somebody just asked him, "Hey, what do you see happening in agriculture in the next 50 years?" And he said, without hesitation, he said that all of the land will be owned by government. I'll have a contract with John Deere to farm it autonomously. And everybody laughed because in 1994, I'm sure that sounded like an April Fool's joke, right? And we're so close to that happening right now. And every farmer who has a John Deere, whether it be tractor or combine, and if you have signed one of their telematics agreements, you signed a document that in section 3 says John Deere can use your data in any way, shape, or form they see fit, and they can share it with anybody around the world outside of the United States. You willingly signed it. You signed it without reading it, I'm pretty sure. And if you think about the data, and they're sharing the data, and then you look at who the individual is that is the newest on the block purchasing farmland, and some people report him as the largest farmland owner in the United States. If you define farmland as tillable land, that's a true story. There are 50 individuals that own more land than Bill Gates. But Bill Gates is in my home state of Nebraska. I can take you to 2 counties where I'm told he has a standing order that anything comes for sale, buy it. The John Deere equipment that you have in your combine and your tractor just happens to be using Microsoft software to capture the data. It then goes to the Microsoft Azure cloud. And so a guy who creates Microsoft, who owns 8% of John Deere stock, the largest individual shareholder within John Deere, who happens to be buying at a more rapid rate prime farmland than anybody else, just connect the dots. You have a guy working in partnership with John Deere and, quite frankly, the government to consume as much land as possible. And then you look at the whole 30 by 30 initiative, which did not come from Joe Biden, although Joe Biden signed Executive Order 14008 on January 21st, 2021. Excuse me, I misspoke. January 27th, 2021. That's an extension of what every country in the world is doing that's part of the United Nations. They want to set aside 30% of the land that's currently growing food by 2030 and return it, as the page section 6 says, and that's executive order of a 57-page executive order, by the way. It says by 2030 we want to return 30% of the land to its natural state, 30% of the land and the water to its natural state. And if you look at what is taking place today in terms of pushing land out of production and then the control of the land that's still in production, and you bring onto the scene something like John Deere, which is stealing the data, and now you have the threat. And I've been personal acquaintances with Bobby Kennedy, RFK, since 2003, but he's pushing to eliminate glyphosate, and there'll be people cheering and saying that's a great thing. Well, if you know a farmer and you know what the farmer deals with in maintaining weed control, you would step back and say, oh, I have some questions about glyphosate, but until we find something better, maybe we should just let the farmer use that. because I don't believe glyphosate causes cancer. I don't believe that in any way, shape, or form. I've been in the agricultural community my entire life. I helped my dad pour chemical in a sprayer before we go out to the field. I've had chemical all over me. I prefer to have livestock today, but when I was a kid, we were doing that. We sprayed our own crops back when I was a kid. What's John Deere doing? John Deere is positioning themselves as the entity to have non chemical approaches to killing weeds through artificial intelligence and with lasers and different apparatuses driving through the field and zapping them instead of spraying chemicals. All of this is happening ironically at the same time as we see autonomous equipment coming onto the scene and farmers struggling. You mentioned something I want to just expand upon because you're spot on. uh, I have a friend in South Dakota that last fall and during harvest they had a tractor with a problem that they have attached to their grain cart. And what they do, farmer does, is takes a grain cart out in the field. The grain cart gets the grain out of the combine, and then they haul it to a truck and they haul it off. Well, if you don't have that grain cart, you're hobbled. You can't really do the same amount of work that you wanted to. They had a computer go down on that tractor. They called John Deere because you can't fix it yourself, just like you said, and you have no right to repair your own equipment if it has that computer on the board. It took them 10 days to get there, and it took 15 minutes to fix it, and the bill was like $17,000. How long can you withstand that? This very week, I was talking to a friend of mine in North Dakota who has a John Deere tractor. He regrets it now, but he needed to get a muffler cleaned, and he talked to a John Deere dealer. I believe he told me it was going to be like $44,000 to fix the muffler. It's $11,000 to go in there and fix one component of this muffler, and apparently there's four components in there. It's $44,000 to fix a muffler. And he took it to a car wash, sprayed it out, got it cleaned up, and it's working fine. So, how long are we going to allow these equipment manufacturers to mine our data and continue to remove us from taking care of our land? And so, I think you just positioned it perfectly. You buy a tractor, but then apparently you didn't buy the tractor. You just paid for the right to use the tractor because if something happens to it, then you got to pay for the right to fix it. You can't fix it yourself. But Ryan, have you thought about land ownership? And it's really no different because we pay to buy a piece of property. Kelly and I bought this piece of property in 2006. And then you pay each year property tax in order to use the property. So you're literally buying the property, paying the mortgage on the property, and then you pay rent. My rent for using my own property that I supposedly own is $1,000 a month. How long can we as farmers continue to deal with this with what we know are challenging margin prices at the end of the day? So that's where we seek alternatives. And I, as a small farm, cannot compete in the commodity business. So that's why with our cattle and our pigs, we go different marketing channels because we have to get more than what the commodity market's going to pay, or we'd already be done.
This is just wild, especially considering I literally 3 days ago on my Instagram made a post on Bill Gates. He was on one of Jimmy Fallon, one of those shows,
I
talking.
saw that clip.
Yeah, and so for the listeners that didn't see this, it Jimmy Kimmel or Fallon was just asking him about what problems the AI solves, and in terms of like displacing jobs. And Bill Gates talks about how baseball, they'll never be replaced because that's just entertainment, and you can't really replicate that with AI. But then he talks about how he's solving all these other problems with AI and autonomous robots, and he brings up food, and that's literally the fact that you just pretty much laid that out to a John Deere. That is absolutely makes, like you said, connected the dots right there. And the fact that, because I've also made posts on the lasers that they shoot at the
Mm-hmm.
weeds. That's scary. Because I mean, that's why I also on my Instagram I share a lot on Bill Gates, because he hides it. He can hide it very well. I mean, I do my own, and I didn't even freaking realize that he's the largest shareholder for John Deere. And then pairing that with what he's trying to, yeah, that's crazy.
It is, and yet we continue to flock to John Deere to buy equipment. I suggest we stop that.
Is that just because of the again, the lure of just John Deere and just how embedded it is in our culture?
Yes. And, the other thing about being a farmer is that whatever segment of agriculture you're in, your biggest challenge is service. And when you need something, you need it. And the supply chain has changed so much, but you develop relationships. And if that first relationship you develop is with a John Deere dealer, you're going to stay connected to where the service is most handy and available. But see, that's changing too, Ryan, because as you probably well know, I never understood why John Deere was doing this because I had a lot of friends, still have friends that are John Deere dealers. And instead of allowing the old system where in every town there's a John Deere dealership owned by a local family, they've eliminated that. Now, if you're going to be one of the chosen John Deere dealerships, you have to have 17 branch stores. And if you have 17, then we want you to think about 30. So they no longer have individual people from the communities that are individual store owners. So some of that's changing because as you have turnover in dealerships and they lose that connection and that relationship with people that they were doing business with, you lose some of your loyalty.
It's very that's another problem. Just I notice in agriculture is like the turnover rate, but to find replacements for that is extremely tough. Same for farmers and ranchers, and that's why I'm doing this podcast and everything I'm doing is how can I help, connect the dots and bring people together, but then also help really drive the incentives to get new folks into the space. I guess that's my next question because you're saying how you talk to the producers a lot. I mean, I know this is kind of a vague question, but from your perspective, how could the consumer side of things, help create change? Because as we've talked earlier, I don't know how much Brooke Rollins and USDA is actually going to help for all of that, and so really have to be taking into our own hands and help with that. So yeah, I don't. How could the consumers outside of, pushing to actually go out and visit a farmer or rancher?
Well, that's pretty much where you started. You said you want to do business with people you can have a handshake with. Where you spend your consumer dollar is going to dictate who's in the business. I mean, right out, look, you're in the perfect place. There's a guy named Jeff Bezos that not far from Austin, Texas, who found a way to get people to buy everything they need through his company and have it delivered to their house. That doesn't benefit anybody in your community. When you continue to do business with Amazon, you're destroying your local infrastructure to go down to a local grocery store, go to a radio shop or whatever the case that you're looking for, and buy a TV at some place where you can go talk to the people and shake the hand. Whether it's food or consumer goods or energy, whatever the case may be that you need, who you're doing business with is who you're giving your vote to be a survivor. And if you're not doing business with your local community is going to die.
The grocery store aspect's very challenging too because now it's become very difficult to find food. It's hard to tell if the food is local or even American made. Um, so that's because I know there's smaller grocery stores and whatnot that will try to promote local and have actual labels that showcase that. But I know Sprouts and like these other are starting to make better waves of that. But when thinking of maybe like Walmart or the other really big grocery stores, essentially, it's very, very difficult for the consumer to figure that out.
One third of all groceries sold in the United States come through a Walmart store. If you're buying your food at Walmart, you're part of the problem. If you're in Texas, HEB is a bigger store that offers a tremendous variety. It's employee owned, and they work as hard as they can at that size and scale for being working with local producers. The HEB in my part of the country is Hy-Vee. It's employee owned. Hy-Vee does some regional local food aspects, and they're not always the cheapest in town. But if you are going to continue to do business with somebody like a Walmart, again, you're asking for your community to die.
that was the one good thing about being in Texas is really learning about HEB and especially during the pandemic because their response was really incredible in a lot of ways. Um, okay, sorry, I'm still
And
just
I
kind
just
of.
want to
Oh, go
add,
ahead.
Ryan, no
Yeah.
matter where your viewers are, uh, HEB is that entity in Texas, and I don't think they've expanded outside of Texas at all. But that exists in every part of the country I go to. I can go to Pennsylvania and find that same example. And sometimes it's not the most convenient place to go. But if you care about your community and you want to keep all of that economic development and keep an opportunity for your kids to say, hey, I want to grow up in the same community that I grew up. I want my kids to grow up in the same community that I grew up in, then you're going to have to do some of these things that make sure that you ensure that community is going to be there.
Yep. That's why. Very great point. Why we've deflected a lot of our personal responsibilities as people for a very long time, especially as things become more efficient. And I mean, now, like for example, Uber Eats, you can just Uber food whenever. And if we again want to create the change that we want to see long term for ourselves, for our children and future children, then you have to put your money where your mouth is. Because I actually made this post yesterday. I get really tired of hearing parents saying they will do X, Y, Z, and even die for their children, yet they won't live for them. They won't take care of their health, so they can be there for not just their children but their grandchildren. Because I think about my family. I'm not. This is not to fault my family at all. It's just part of the system. Because my mom passed away, so she's never going to be there to see my future family. My dad has always had a pretty bad back and knees, and so he has never really had the physical body to be very active later in life. And so I don't know. To me, it's just I don't understand that why. I mean, I'm not a parent, so that's why I'm trying to understand that. I know that in current state of America, things are stressful and this or that, but at the same time, cooking a steak or some eggs does not take long whatsoever. And if you think long term, buying that steak now rather than buying McDonald's and then paying for more meds and doctor visits down the road will be infinitely more expensive than that steak. It's just that's just the major challenge is trying to have people really think about these things, but then also take that first step to make these changes. Because again, if we don't, then you're just contributing to the problem. Like you're saying, the local communities die. The food system that's already centralized only gets more centralized, and then Bill Gates' vision comes true essentially.
Why have we convinced ourselves, Ryan, that this is the highest stress period of time in the history of the United States?
Social media and the internet.
Probably because I go back and I read history, and you read, you can talk about the roaring 20s, but if you go look at what was happening on the farm in the 20s, there were some deadly, violent protests in county courthouses all across farm country in the 20s because farmers were going broke and they were selling out. If you look at the pioneering days before that, in the late 1800s, when the Great Plains of America, which I'm pretty content with it being called the flyover region. If people don't want to stop here, I'm great because I just love the sparsity. But you look at the number of people who literally went mad, and we had insane asylums in most communities, well, larger communities, because the wind would blow and your log cabin that you tried to build was full of holes and rodents and snakes, and you study how many women literally went mad because the wind blew day in and day out and they didn't have the conveniences that we have now. We complain if our electricity is out for 2 hours. These folks didn't have electricity. They had to walk to a creek to get a bucket of water to bring it in, to burn it on a stove, burning buffalo chips in order to create heat to get the water warm enough to either cook something, take a bath once a week, or cook or do something else with the water, do dishes. That was stress. The only reason we have stress in our life today is we've convinced ourselves that we're stressed. It's
It
all in your
reminds me
head.
of. I agree. It reminds me of the infamous photo from the Dust Bowl of the older woman with her two children.
Yep,
And then I learned last year that she was only early 30s in that picture. She looks like she's in her 50s. And that in
exactly.
itself is a great way to explain exactly what you just said. But then again, that's also why I push to go and visit a farm, because it only takes one day of work to really open up your eyes to the insane amount of work that it requires to produce food for everybody essentially. Um, so yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. The whole John Deere thing is really opening up my eyes, because I knew about the technology side of things, but everything else, it's interesting too, because I remember in my grad program, I come from a tech background. John Deere came there a lot, and so I think about the types of people that could be potentially working there from like a corporate environment, and those are the types of folks too that have never visited a ranch or a farm, or grew up on one too. And so working for a tech company like that, and then helping probably shift their work culture over a long enough time horizon, it definitely can make sense how a company like John Deere has really fallen far from where they started.
One other area that you made me think of, and I'm going to shift my camera so that folks can see this, but last week I was in Marcus, Iowa, and up on my wall I put that a group of high school students in industrial arts class made that and gifted that to me when I spoke at their school.
That's awesome.
That's my TV show, Trent on the Loose. Might be backwards. Is it backwards for you, Ryan?
No,
Flip cameras.
that looks so cool.
Oh, so the reason I'm sharing that is that how many times do we hear in today's world that our education system is just completely screwed up? Not at that high school. That high school's got 200 kids, and of the 200 kids, 167 of them are in the industrial arts classes learning a trade, whether that be welding, construction work, etching, leather work, machine work, mechanic work in a shop, rebuilding engines. They take an engine, completely tear down an engine that's not working, and rebuild it. And I've only touched the surface on what they're cabinet making. They're teaching young people skills, and the culture that they're providing around learning is attracting everybody who wants to in that school wants to be a part of it. And they're part of what you saw a little sign there that says Skills USA, which is like a sister company, so or not really an organization, but similar things in terms of all the hands-on projects that you can do similar to FFA. And I'm at this school and I'm like, why isn't every school doing something like this that actually prepares kids to be a part of our future and to enable their own future? And anybody who's trying to hire a plumber or a welder or somebody to pour some concrete knows how difficult it is to find somebody that does that. Not if they graduated from that high school. And now that high school's got an opportunity because the local community college saw what they were doing. So they're going to incorporate their shop and their teachers and their cultures into the community college effort. You just have to start something to be proud of instead of sitting here saying, what's wrong with our education system today? Be a change agent and make it right.
Yeah, amen. No, I love that. That's really cool, and that's I reflect on the farm I worked on a lot too, seeing the kids that, because I had the fortune to where the farm owner and his family, and he had a 5, 3, 1 year old at the time, and just seeing them on the farm too was just incredible. Because again, that's something I'd never seen my whole life. Um, Obviously, read about it and see it online, but then seeing it in person, how much they loved being out there, wanting to help out with whatever we're doing. Even in the farmers markets, they wanted to stand right next to us, talking to everybody that came to visit, and help pick produce, and then be with the animals, and just let kids be kids out in nature. And I just wish people. That's again why I push people, because you can't. When you think about it, it might not seem too impactful, but once the feeling is just inexplicable. Being on a farm or ranch, having the actual fresh farm food to where it doesn't make you feel like crap at all. It's just tragic how we've gone so far away from that. But at the same time, my hope is that it slowly is changing in the right direction, especially with the pandemic opened up a lot of people's eyes too, of thinking about just reflecting on their life and fulfillment, or meaning for what they're doing with their life. So I really can hope that the the upside of social media is being able to share what you're doing on a farm or ranch too. Um, so that's also another thing that the consumers need to do is if they see good stuff revolved around agriculture online, you need to share that out to friends, family, and share that online as well because knowledge is truly power. And going back to the bird flu example, I've shared this before. They tried to do this in Canada to where there was a farm that had a flock of 400 ostriches, and last year they tested positive for I think 30 or 35 of the birds, and then they were
Two,
ordered to
two
two.
birds. Patty had two birds. Katie, excuse me, had two birds test positive with the PCR test.
Because I remember reading they said something about okay two, but then yeah, then when caught that they were trying to the government was going to enforce culling all of them February 1st of this year, and so social media they shared that out a lot. They had a GoFundMe and really pushed back to a lot of that, and now they haven't made they didn't end up culling the flock. They're still kind of in the process, I believe.
April 14th and 15th is their trial date to determine whether or not they can keep their ostriches.
So even the fact that they were able to push that back just by sharing online can show that just doing that can work. Because to me, and from my perspective, for a lot of the reasons why the government institutions throughout decades and years have been able to get away with this is the fact that the general public is not aware of it at all. And so that's again why I try to do everything I'm doing on media is sharing that out because with like raw milk, for example, we are so gaslit on all of that.
No doubt about it.
Well,
Have
that's
you
really
had
all.
J.R.
Oh,
Burdick on?
so actually, I've been in the middle of we we were going to talk last week, but we were having technical issues, so we're trying to reschedule that. But I've been really looking forward
JR
to.
is fantastic. He stands by his convictions and he's just
Yep,
incredible. His
yeah,
whole family.
I'm really excited to have him on. But with that, then that's really all I've had. I'm really grateful for having you on here. If there's any last things you'd like to share, or where the listeners could find you, now would be a good time to share.
Sure. Loose Tails. You can just search Loose Tails. Loose is Loos. Tails is Tales. Make sure you don't spell Loose Tails wrong, Ryan, or you'll get to a place you don't really want to be and get some algorithms that are bad. So Loose Tails Media. I'm on Substack. I'm shadow banned like everybody else, telling the truth on Twitter or X. Rumble's been good, and most importantly, just activate. My Substack. Oh, I should also promote them. The Substack has been really good in terms of outreach and feedback. So that's trentloos.substack.com.
Perfect. Thank you, Trent. Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more.